The Kia Sportage is back, but is it worth it? Now, the Kia Sportage in Malaysia is available in two variants, a mid and a high, and they're also available with two powertrains. You can either get a 2.0-litre naturally aspirated petrol engine with power going to the front wheels via a 6-speed torque converter automatic gearbox. However, the majority of buyers we expect will end up opting for one of these, which is the 1.6-litre turbocharged petrol engine, which is instead mated to a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. And then from there, you also have a choice of either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive like the car that we have here, meaning that now within the BERMAZ stable, this is one of the most affordable ways to get into an all-wheel drive vehicle compared to the much more expensive CX-5. But that's kind of the point, because where Mazda is slowly moving up market, BERMAZ has realized that its mass market buyers are being underserved, which is why the Kia brand is now here to the rescue. Although to call this car mass market would be a little bit of a disservice, and that comes quite clear from the moment you set eyes on it. For example, this design language is called Opposites United, which is perhaps highlighted by these ridiculous daytime running lights that start here and end here. And those frame a set of diamond-shaped LED headlights, which certainly make this car look very distinctive indeed. Although you still have the Tiger nose grille up front, which was first penned by Peter Schreier God, it must be 20 years ago. That's still integrated into this ever-evolving design, making this a very distinctive-looking car indeed. Now, while you have the Kia badge up here, the LED fog lights have actually been hidden very nicely in the bumper, very similar to what we've seen before from the Kia Sorento. But it is worth pointing out that this Kia Sportage, although it looks very different from everything else in the lineup, carries its own very distinctive design language, where the Sorento and the Carnival are both a little bit more mature, a little bit more brash, a little bit more in your face. This takes a slightly more dynamic edge, and that is very clear from the front end. And that also continues down the side, because as you can see, although the Sportage takes up the same sort of footprint that you get from, say, Hyundai Tucson or Mazda CX-5, it does look very distinctive indeed. It starts primarily with the wheels. Now, on these high-spec models, you get 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in hand-cooked tires. Now, 18s might seem like they're on the smaller side, but there is a very clear reason for them, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But more importantly, even though these alloy wheels are on the smaller side, the design themselves is very distinctive. In fact, if you look at this element here, it actually reminds me a little bit of the daytime running light signature that you get in the Kia Carnival. So again, although the Sportage looks very different, it ties itself back into that family design language very well. As we move further down the side, there's a little bit of chrome to underline the window, and it breaks up the monotony back here with a nice sort of D-pillar garnish. And you also got functional roof rails up here, which is great because you don't actually get a sunroof. Now, the Sportage that we get in Malaysia is also of distinction, because in Malaysia we get the long wheelbase model, which is why this rear door is as long as it is, and it benefits rear seat passengers enormously. In other markets like Europe, for example, they get a short wheelbase model, which is more fitting with their demands, but that would have been too small for us. Now, the other feature on this car, which again ties into all other Kia models that we've driven in the past, be it combustion or electric, is this button here. I still do not understand the recalcitrance of Korean car makers when it comes to induction type door handles. They insist on having a bloody button, and it's not even painted. And that continues to the rear too, because you have these very distinctive full LED tail lights, replete with a reverse light down here, which I think looks quite nice. And I think the overall design of the rear end is just as distinctive as everything else. Now, even though there is a clear focus on design here, there has not been a compromise in terms of practicality, because the tailgate in the Kia Sportage is quite generous. Even though this is an all-wheel drive car, you get plenty of room back here, certainly large enough for a family of 5. On top of that, you also get a tonneau cover which can be hidden underneath the boot floor should you need it. And under this boot floor, and standard BERMAZ Maggie mat, you will also find a space saver spare wheel. So that means that no matter what, this car does not compromise in terms of practicality, making it a very easy car to recommend. That sense of distinction also carries into the cabin, because while there are certain elements in here that we've seen before from other Kia models, it's executed in a way that is unique to the Sportage. So for example, we still get the same twin digital instrumentation that we get from other Kia models, presented in the sort of curved sort of panel here, which looks very nice and is kind of reminiscent of what you get in a BMW. Now on this particular model, being the higher spec, you get a 12.3-inch digital instrument display up ahead, and you get a 12.3-inch infotainment display in the middle. Both of these screens are relatively high refresh rate and with decent graphics, which means that at no point do your eyes sort of feel pain as you look at them. And more importantly, the central screen is very, very responsive indeed. All of your inputs are translated very quickly, and of course you also get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is always nice to see. On top of that, the interface of Android Auto on this car takes up the entirety of the screen, which means that you don't get a weird panel on one side that just says Android Auto. Hyundai. Anyway, moving further down, you also get this sort of multi-function touch display down here. Now, this is also limited only to the high models. This is very similar to what we saw from the Kia EV6, where this single touch screen here with a couple of dials on either side does multiple things. So with one setting, they display your usual shortcut buttons. Again, something that we've seen before from Hyundai and Kia models, something that I like a lot because this still functions even when you have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto running. But if you'd like to make controls to your HVAC system, you just have to tap it and then it shows all of your HVAC functionality. So now you have dials on either end in order to control your dual zone climate control as well as your fan speed, etc., all displayed right here. Now, of course, physical buttons are always better to me. However, given the fact that these buttons always stay in the same place and they always have the same functions, it is a little bit more tactile and a little bit more usable, especially when you're driving, compared to just having everything integrated into a touchscreen the way you get in a lot of Chinese vehicles. Now, moving further down, you get a USB-C port, USB-A port, and a 12-volt socket. You get a couple of cup holders here, which are retractable should you just want there to be a big open space instead of having cup holders. You also get a rotary gear selector up here, an engine start stop button, and for the all-wheel drive model you also get a drive mode selector here, which includes not only your drive modes themselves like Eco, Normal, Sport and Smart, but if you press it you also get access to this car's central differential lock, which ensures that there is a perfect 50-50 split of power, which is very useful when you are off-roading. You also get hill descent control and a 360 camera. All those buttons live here. Now, on that point, I would like to point out a couple of things. Firstly, this car doesn't seem to provide any sort of wireless charging pad, which is strange given the fact that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto can be displayed wirelessly. Secondly, there are 5 buttons in a bank that live on the left side of this center console. Now, these are in other markets to control your heated and ventilated seats as well as your heated steering wheel. We don't get any of those here in Malaysia. Now, the more unfortunate part is this panel could have been redesigned and remolded for markets like ours that do not get these options. Instead, they just put blank buttons instead. This is the highest spec and most expensive Kia Sportage you can buy in Malaysia. The last thing I want to see are blank buttons. Now, moving beyond that, material quality in this car is pretty good as well. You get lots of soft touch materials, even up here on the dash, replete with stitching. The same goes for the door cards, which are nice and soft. You also get some leather here on the door cards themselves, again with stitching, and the seats themselves are quite good. Now, it is worth pointing out that even again on this flagship model, only the driver's seat is powered, and even then it doesn't come with memory. You do get lumbar, however, but as I mentioned, you still don't get ventilation. This is very annoying because at the moment it's about 35 degrees centigrade outside, and it would be nice if my back was being cooled. Now, beyond that, you also get a decent size glove box here. You get a decently sized center armrest console here, but although this is an electric gear selector or electronic gear selector, because there is obviously a long shaft going from the front to the rear, there is no storage down here, although the door cards are big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle and then some more stuff behind it, and of course you get another pocket up here for smaller items. So overall, life in here is not that bad. Now, before I go to the rear, I'd also like to point out the fact that on this 1.6 litre turbocharged all-wheel drive model, you also get a Harman Kardon audio system. Now, before you go clutching at your bits and pieces, thinking that this is the best specification in the world, I would like to point out the fact that these are only 8 speakers. Now, I bring that up because when you mention Harman Kardon, you expect a certain degree of high fidelity, clarity, and audio quality. Unfortunately, because it's 8 speakers, it is very enveloping, you get very good treble, you get very good bass, and the mids are also decently powerful. However, it doesn't quite give you the sound stage that you would have come to expect from a Harman Kardon audio system because there is no center speaker in the middle of the dash, which means that as I'm sat here, my left feed comes from all the way to the further side of the car. It's a very, very small matter, and it matters only to people who are insane about audio the way I am. But for everybody else, this is as good as the Bose systems that you get in higher end Mazdas, and certainly better than any non-brand audio system that you get in other C-segment SUVs. Now you join me in the rear half of the cabin of the Kia Sportage, looking very uncomfortable. And the reason why I am in this position is to demonstrate the fact that these rear seats have an incredible amount of adjustment. There are some 15 levels of adjustment, which means that you can either sit bolt upright like this, which is frankly torturous, or you can actually move it further back to your heart's desire to a point where it is much, much more comfortable. Now, when the seat is set up like this, as you can see, sat behind myself, about 170 centimeters, I have a huge amount of knee room and a pretty good amount of headroom. The latter, no doubt, as a result of this car not being offered with any sort of sunroof or panoramic sunroof, eating into headspace. And so life back here is pretty good. On top of that, the floors in this car are nice and low, which means that sat even like this, I have a decent amount of under thigh support, and I can always tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me should I be even taller still. And because these seat bases haven't been artificially shortened, I have a good amount of under thigh support even stretched out like this. Now, in terms of other amenities back here, there are a couple of rear air conditioning vents. Yes, they are high enough, which means that they don't count as crotch coolers. You also get USB-C ports on the side of the front seats. You get these hooks behind the front seats as well. You get decently sized pockets here, big enough pockets here for a litre or a half-litre size bottle. And of course, you have a deployable center armrest with a couple of cup holders. For family buyers, you get a couple of ISOFIX mounts, which are very, very easy to locate. And because this is the long wheelbase model, the doors open nice and wide, and there is plenty of clearance, even for bulky rear-facing child seats. On top of that, if you have, for example, towels or cloths or the various things that come with children, you can actually hang them up on the back of the rear headrest here. There's actually a little bit of rubber here in order to hold anything behind this. This is actually designed to be a jacket holder, although I imagine a nappy could probably go back here as well. Now, of course, you could argue that the space back here is not that flexible because these rear seats don't actually sit on a slider, so you can't move these seats front and rear. But that also means that no matter what, your rear seat passengers always have a lot of space. And more importantly, I would like to point out that the material quality back here is just about as good as it is in the front. These seats, for example, are wrapped in the same material. They are all nice and soft. Everything you touch here is broadly the same. And of course, you do get some scratchy plastic sort of on the backs of the seats as well as on the center console. But again, these are considered hard wearing items. These are spaces where children might kick them over time or scuff them over time. And so you want there to be harder wearing plastic in areas like that where they might have taken damage. However, I am bothered by a couple of things. The minor of the two being the fact that the beltline on this car is quite high. So if you have a smaller child in a front-facing child seat, they might not get a view out, which may increase the likelihood of car sickness. The other problem is, as you look at that high beltline, you will also inevitably discover that the material quality in the back here is very different from what it is in the front. The tops of these door cards are very hard plastic. Although down here it's nice and soft like this armrest here, this is also hard plastic, which means that there has been some cost rationalization in order to get this car at the price point that it is. Let's not forget that the Sportage starts at 147,000 ringgit. Now, overall, I do think that life back here is pretty suitable for a family car, which is what the Sportage primarily is. However, compared to vehicles like the Mazda CX-5, there's more space, yes, but Kia's always had a bit of a dynamic edge to it, or at least that's always been the case between Kia and Hyundai. Hyundai focuses on luxury and comfort. Kia focuses more on dynamic, engaging drives and slightly more exciting design. And so this Sportage certainly looks exciting, but does it feel exciting? Now, just to recap, the model we're driving today is the 1.6-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder, which means that there is also a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox in the middle. But more importantly, because this is the flagship Kia Sportage, it also means that there is an all-wheel drive system in here. So this represents about 187,000 ringgit if I'm not mistaken, although you can knock off quite a bit of money if you were to just go for the two-wheel drive model, which I think is a lot more sensible for people who primarily do a lot of driving in town, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, the thing about the Kia Sportage is that this is a nameplate that's been around in Malaysia for quite some time. I think it's been probably about 30 years since the first Kia Sportage landed on Malaysian shores. And so after a little bit of a hiatus, the Sportage name is back. And now I will say that it is back stronger than ever. This Sportage does represent a really great value proposition because from the get-go, you are fully aware of the fact that, for example, this car has incredibly good specifications. Again, you've got that 1.6 turbo up front. Again, you've got that 7-speed dual clutch automatic. And again, we have the option of all-wheel drive in our market. So all of this seems to suggest that Kia is taking the Malaysian market very seriously by offering the very best that they have. And in terms of this powertrain, it's relatively responsive. As I put my foot down, it does sort of pick up speed in a sort of reasonable enough fashion, although I will admit that there is some degree of turbo lag. Of course, this is to be expected with any small turbocharged engine, and admittedly the DCT does do a very good job of trying to get to the right ratio as quickly as possible. There are not a lot of delays in that regard, especially when you're trying to get a move on. However, it's not all hunky-dory because there are some parts of this powertrain that are not so great. For starters, when you're driving at lower speeds, you will realize that this DCT is not like what you get from, say, a Volkswagen Tiguan, for example, because its primary goal here is efficiency and smoothness. And so as you drive, especially at low speeds, etc., it does try to sort of mash the gears together as smoothly as possible, which means that sometimes when you're trying to get a quick move on, the Sportage does have a bit of a delay to it. Secondly, I have noticed that for whatever reason, when you're driving, for example, at low speeds over a sustained period of time, like when I'm trying to drive through my multi-story car park in my condominium, the gearbox doesn't really seem to know what it wants to do. It will drop to first gear, then second gear, and then it'll hit third gear, and then drop into second, and then it just gets a little bit messy. And so in order to make that a bit smoother, I've ended up resorting to using the paddle shifters and locking it in second gear and just maintaining a slow speed all the way through my car park. But aside from that, this powertrain is very strong. For example, it is very refined. Even at startup, there are very few vibrations that come through the cabin, and the noise is also very well suppressed. And then as you start to pick up speed, you will realize about 110, 120 kilometers an hour, the engine remains at a very low or relatively low engine speed, which means that again, noise intrusion into the cabin is pretty impressively minimized. Now, if you start to push on a bit, you will notice that the Kia Sportage doesn't quite have the same sort of sharp edge that you'd expect from something like, say, a Mazda CX-5. Instead, this car has been tuned to be sort of the best car to most people. And so the suspension in this car is a little bit on the softer side, at least in terms of the secondary ride. The primary ride is also relatively soft, which means that if you were to hit potholes, etc., it smooths out the lumps and bumps pretty convincingly. And in terms of the secondary ride, it's not as soft as what you get in, say, a Chinese vehicle, like, say, a GWM Haval H6 or a Jaecoo J7 Turbo, but it's still soft enough that there is a little bit of body roll, enough to sort of inform you that the weight of this car is moving around, but at no point does this car feel like it's taking confidence away from the driver. Instead, it just feels like a very well sorted, very well balanced chassis. It doesn't matter if you're driving in town, if you're driving at speed, this chassis does just feel very, very impressive to be around and to maneuver, which is certainly nice to see. And so, as you're driving about, it is slightly unfortunate, however, that the overall refinement of the car is perhaps not up to the standard that we've come to expect. So, for example, at about 110, 120 kilometers an hour, you'll begin to realize that there is a little bit of wind noise that creeps in around the A-pillar, which is certainly not great. And of course, at the same speed, you'll also realize that the road noise in this car is quite apparent. Now, these Hankook tires are supposed to be geared primarily towards comfort, and the fact that these are 18-inch alloy wheels, it also means it absorbs the lumps and bumps pretty well too. They should also be more affordable to replace compared to the 19-inch rollers that you get in something like even a PROTON X70. However, again, the amount of noise that they kick up is quite considerable. I would consider swapping these for something from, say, Continental with a slightly softer compound in order to reduce the amount of noise that travels into the cabin, because I think that that would make a very sizable difference. The wind noise in this car, like I said, is negligible, but the road noise is quite substantial. But of course, if you get over that, you will realize that this car is just very easy to live with. And that is when you realize that this car's ADAS functionality helps with that a lot. Now, we have spoken at length about just how polished and how refined Korean advanced driver assistance features are, and it is no different in the Kia Sportage. For example, this car comes chock full with level 2 semi-autonomy features, including things like adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, lane centering assist, etc., etc. All of these things that you come to expect from a mid-size family SUV or a C-segment family SUV. However, the Sportage goes above and beyond by offering things like the blind spot view monitor, where in a Honda, for example, it will show you a feed only of your left side, and even that in the central screen. On the Kia Sportage, it is available on the left and right and is displayed right in your line of sight through the digital instrument cluster, which means that it is a system that you will come to rely on more and more. And of course, in addition to the blind spot monitoring, it does mean that it truly minimizes the risk of a potential accident by hitting a vehicle in your blind spot that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed. And because this car's level 2 semi-autonomy is so polished, it also means that in traffic jams, again, you can rely on the system to reliably drive you through stop-start traffic. And in fact, even when you're covering motorway miles, this car does a very good job, a very convincing job of centering the car in lane, which means that, again, you're taking away a lot of the strain of driving, particularly over long-distance travel. As far as I'm concerned, it just feels that the Sportage is a very, very considered package. It is one that BERMAZ has considered carefully in order to ensure that all the features that family buyers want are in here without adding unnecessary costs. So overall, it does feel like a pretty great place to be. However, there are those niggles that I mentioned earlier, little things like the expected refinement, for example, the slightly disappointing audio system, as well as the slightly disappointing specifications in terms of things like a powered passenger seat or ventilated front pews. But these things are truly just minor. As we've seen vehicles like the Mazda CX-5 and the Honda CR-V steadily get more and more expensive. In fact, the CR-V is pushing about 200,000 ringgit in its top spec guise, and the CX-5 has been quite comfortably over 200,000 ringgit for flagship models for quite some time now, which means that for the sub 200,000 ringgit segment, customers within that space do need options. Now, instead of going to a Chinese manufacturer, for example, like GWM or Jaecoo or Chery, if you want something more established, then the Kia Sportage is a pretty good option within that space. Because, for example, the English in this car is excellent. The ADAS functionality in this car is excellent. There are certain features in this car that are executed with a certain degree of polish that you just don't get unless you buy from an established automaker. However, if you're looking at this through an entirely logical lens, then yes, you can get more for your money if you buy Chinese. For example, if you were to want a plug-in hybrid, you can now get the Jaecoo J7 PHEV from under 160,000 ringgit. If you can't plug in your car, there's the GWM Haval H6, which offers an excellent hybrid system without having to faff about with plugging it in. And then, of course, if you want something that is more established, more refined, something that feels more premium and traditional, there is obviously the Mazda CX-5. But if you're in that zone in the middle, where a CX-5 feels a little bit too old hat and a GWM Haval H6 or a Jaecoo J7 feels a bit too weird, then this is the car for you. The Kia Sportage is an incredibly impressive package, and it is one that I think will serve families across the country dutifully and happily. Especially when you consider the fact that being a BERMAZ represented product, it means that you get a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty with 5 years free servicing included, which means that for the most part, this is essentially a fuel and drive kind of car. Is it going to set your heart on fire? No. Is this a car that you'll wax lyrical about? Probably not. But does that mean this is a bad car? Absolutely not. And I think that you would be absolutely daft for discounting the Kia Sportage if you're in this segment or if you're in the market for a C-segment SUV just because it's Korean. In any case, that concludes our review of the Kia Sportage 1.6-litre turbocharged all-wheel drive high variant. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. All our links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.